What would you do if you found a wounded black panther lying in the middle of the jungle, its cub crying at its side, and its golden eyes staring straight into yours? Not with rage, but with trust. Would you walk away, call for help, or risk everything to step closer? Comment below before you hear the full story. This isn't just another wildlife story. This is the moment a predator chose a human to save her child. Stay until the end. You won't forget it. In the emerald depths of the Okavango jungle, where sunlight weaves through towering fig trees and the air carries secrets older than time, Ezra Mbeki, a 27-year-old wildlife tracker, had carved out a solitary life. He had traded the roar of cities for the whispers of the wild, living alone in a humble wooden outpost, studying animal trails, and documenting elusive species with nothing but his journal and a vintage camera. But peace in the jungle is always temporary. That morning, the silence shattered with a sound Ezra had never heard before, a chilling, high-pitched cry echoing through the mist. It wasn't the call of a monkey or the growl of a predator. It was raw, agonizing, human in its desperation. Ezra froze. Every instinct told him to stay back, but something deeper, a gut pull he couldn't ignore, pushed him forward. He grabbed his machete and followed the sound through tangled underbrush, past rusted hunting traps and gnarled vines that clawed at his arms. The cry came again, weaker this time, more urgent. And then, in a clearing shadowed by ancient trees, he saw it. A massive black panther, blood matting its flank, was slumped beside something. A cub. The cub cried, pressed against its mother's motionless body. Ezra's heart pounded. She was still breathing, but barely. And the cub? It turned its wide, golden eyes toward him. In that moment, Ezra realized this wasn't a chance encounter. This was a moment that would change everything. Ezra inched forward, the jungle holding its breath around him. His boots sank into the damp earth as he moved closer to the black mass lying in the clearing. The panther's flanks barely rose with each shallow breath. Her power faded, her coat matted with blood and leaves. But it was the cub that broke him. No larger than a house cat, the tiny creature pressed its trembling body against its mother's side, letting out a soft, hoarse cry that cracked through the stillness like thunder. Ezra crouched low, slowly extending a hand, his fingers open in peace. He was no stranger to wounded animals, but this was different. The mother should have lunged, should have snarled, but she didn't. Her half-lidded eyes met his with something that stopped him cold. Trust. Wounded and dying, she was placing her cub's fate, and her own, in his hands. Then Ezra saw it. A cruel iron trap clamped around her hind leg, its jagged teeth buried deep into flesh and bone. Blood pooled beneath her. She had dragged herself all the way here, carrying her cub with every ounce of strength she had left. Ezra's throat tightened. This wasn't just suffering, it was sacrifice. The cub turned to him again, its eyes wide, glassy, yet filled with something ancient. Ezra's breath hitched. There was no time to wait. He dropped his pack, gripped his knife, and moved toward the trap. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a silent plea for a miracle. Ezra's hands trembled as he knelt beside the wounded black panther, the iron trap's serrated edges buried deep in her leg. Flies buzzed around the torn flesh, and blood had soaked the earth beneath her. The jungle was hot, but Ezra shivered. He knew this was madness. Helping an apex predator, vulnerable and cornered, could end in tragedy. But her eyes, they didn't threaten, they pleaded. With the cub tucked in his satchel, mewling softly, Ezra whispered a steady stream of reassurance to the mother. "I've got you. Hold on." He slid his machete beneath the trap, wedging it open. The metal creaked. The panther flinched but didn't lash out. Sweat poured from his forehead as he dug in deeper, twisting and levering with all his strength. Then, with a sharp metallic snap, the jaws sprang open. The panther let out a guttural groan and collapsed. Ezra didn't hesitate. He sheathed the machete, pulled off his shirt, and wrapped the leg tightly to slow the bleeding. She was massive, heavier than anything he'd ever lifted, but inch by inch he dragged her onto a makeshift tarp of vines and cloth. The journey back was brutal, through brambles, over roots, the cub crying at his side. But Ezra didn't stop, not once. By the time the outpost came into view, his arms were shaking, his breath ragged. He had risked everything to save her, because in her silent trust, she had made a request no human could ignore. Please, save my child. Ezra had never moved so fast in his life. He wrapped the mother panther's wounded leg with layers of gauze and cloth from his pack, using strips from his own shirt to bind it tight. The bleeding slowed, but not by much. She barely stirred as he slung her over a makeshift stretcher fashioned from branches and vines. With the cub tucked against his chest, Ezra hauled them both back to his outpost, every step through the jungle echoing with desperation. By nightfall, the sky cracked open with thunder. Rain poured in sheets, drumming on the roof as Ezra lit a fire and laid the mother panther on a pile of blankets near the hearth. She was fading fast. Fever burned through her, and every breath came like a tremor. The cub whimpered and refused to leave her side, pressing its tiny body into her fur. Ezra mixed a slurry of crushed herbs and clean water, gently dabbing it onto the wound. Hours passed. He fed the cub from a shallow bowl, whispering softly as he worked, hands trembling, eyes heavy with exhaustion. He couldn't sleep. Every flicker of the fire cast shadows that danced like spirits on the walls. The panther's breathing hitched, then steadied. Ezra's heart surged, hope fragile as glass. Sometime before dawn, she stirred. Her eyes cracked open, cloudy and weak, but aware. Her gaze drifted to the cub, then to Ezra. And in that look, silent and fleeting, he felt it. She was still fighting, and she wasn't alone anymore. Ezra hadn't slept. The panther's breathing had stabilized, but only just. He'd finally stepped out to gather food, roots, berries, maybe a bird or two, anything to keep the mother and cub alive. But as he followed a familiar creek bed, the jungle changed. The birds were silent, the wind still. Then came the sound, a low, deliberate growl. Ezra turned slowly. A second black panther, male, massive, eyes like dying stars, stood half-shrouded in foliage, muscles coiled. This wasn't the cub's father. This was a rogue, drawn by blood and weakness. Ezra knew the danger. Rogue panthers were territorial killers. He backed away, heartbeat roaring in his ears, slipping between trees, ducking vines. The predator didn't chase, not yet. It was circling, stalking. By the time Ezra returned to the outpost, sweat-soaked and breathless, he knew. They were being hunted, and this time, not by poachers, but by something far more silent and far more lethal. The jungle held its breath. From the dense underbrush, the rogue panther emerged, larger, darker, and with a hunger in its eyes that sent a chill down Ezra's spine. It stalked low, muscles rippling, golden eyes fixed on the cub. Ezra grabbed his rifle, heart pounding, unsure if he could fire in time. But then, a low growl, not from the trees, but behind him. The injured mother, who hours ago could barely breathe, rose from the shadows of the hut. Her wounded leg trembled, blood still seeping, but her stance was unyielding. With a snarl that echoed through the canopy, she stepped between Ezra and the intruder. The rogue hesitated. The mother bared her fangs, every inch of her wounded frame blazing with maternal fury. In a flash of primal calculation, the rogue turned, vanishing into the forest. Ezra stood frozen, not because she needed him, but because in that moment she didn't. The days that followed felt like quiet resurrection. Ezra tended to the panther's wounds with herbal salves and fresh water, while the cub nestled close, never straying far from his side. The mother, though weak, began to eat, small scraps at first, then meat Ezra had hunted just for her. Each breath she drew was stronger than the last. The cub grew playful, pouncing on Ezra's boots and tugging at vines like a mischievous shadow. Slowly, the jungle's silence lifted. Life returned, not just to the animals he'd saved, but to Ezra himself. In their survival, he rediscovered purpose and something even deeper, belonging. By the time dawn painted the treetops in soft gold, the jungle had changed, and so had Ezra. The mother panther could now walk without collapsing, her limp slow but steady. The cub, full of mischief and life, darted between Ezra's legs, chasing moths and pawing at fallen leaves. Ezra had begun to ration his supplies less, knowing the time was near. And then, one morning, it happened. The panther stood at the edge of the clearing, her cub beside her. She didn't look back at first, just stood tall, eyes fixed on the jungle. Ezra approached slowly, heart tight in his chest. She turned then, meeting his gaze with something ancient and powerful: gratitude, respect, goodbye. Ezra stood rooted as she stepped into the trees, the cub following close behind. But just before they vanished into the green, the mother panther paused. Slowly, she turned her massive head and looked back, right at Ezra. No growl, no movement, just a gaze that seemed to pierce time itself. Ezra's breath caught. It was a moment that said everything words never could. "Thank you. I remember." Then she was gone. The jungle swallowed her whole, the silence returning like a closing curtain. Ezra stayed there long after they had disappeared, his soul marked by the moment. Back in his outpost, Ezra sat beneath a thatched roof, scribbling the last lines of his journal. He'd come to the Okavango to study the wild, but the wild had studied him. What he found was not just survival, but sacrifice. Not just instinct, but emotion. The mother panther had trusted him when she had every reason not to. That trust reshaped something in him. "Sometimes," he wrote, "the ones we save end up saving us." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in the quiet power of compassion.